I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities of Music. This is Velocities of Music, the podcast. And on this podcast, Tom and I discuss a gravy boat of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives, like what we're doing today, and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. As I just alluded to, today is an artist deep dive that honestly is a long time in the making.
Yeah.
It's time to start part one of our Metallica artist deep dive. We're going to cover today the 80s, the 4 albums Metallica released in the 80s. In depth. And just with the way that the calendar's rolling, give you guys a heads up. We're going to do 80s today. The month's going to end, so we need to do our November wrap up, talk about new music for the month of November, and then we'll wrap up the rest of Metallica over the following 1 or 2. I think we think 2 more podcasts, do a Metallica 3-parter. So before we get started, you can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to Velocities in Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode sent to your device. Also, Velocities in Music does not want your money. Right now, all we want is for you to share Velocities in Music with family or friends whom you feel would benefit from joining in on the music discussion Tom and I try to create on each episode. So, we begin. It's Metallica time.
All right.
Tom, you like Metallica.
I love Metallica.
Are they, would you say they're one of your favorite bands?
They are one of my favorite bands.
They last Friday released a new album. First album since 2008.
Yes. Not counting Lulu 2011,
right,
which was a collaboration album.
Right.
So, yeah. Right.
So, first album in 8 years. Hardwired to Self-Destruct came out on Friday. I don't want to give away too much. It's a long album. I've only made it about halfway through. You've gotten a couple listens in. I've spent a considerable amount of my music listening time devoted towards these 80s albums. Because I got to say, Metallica is not a band that I ever, before Velocities of Music, ever wanted to listen to. I wouldn't, I wasn't some, I don't know, was I a jackass? Like, did I say Metallica's bad music?
No, I don't remember you ever doing that. It was more just you didn't really care. You were kind of indifferent. You knew that you were into other things, which I just took as a challenge.
Yeah, no, you did. No, and you know what, Tom, like Thanksgiving's this Thursday. I'm thankful for you being in my life, Tom.
I'm thankful that you put up with me forcing music down your throat all these years.
But like, if you had not been there for me, Tom, all these years, like saying, Jake, this is really good shit. Like, you need to listen to this because it's gonna change your life. It's gonna make you think about life in a completely different context. If you wouldn't have done that and like forced me into these situations, uncomfortably so at times, like I did not want to listen to some of these albums. And you're like, this is great stuff, Jake. You're gonna love it. It's so awesome. Listen to, and it worked over somehow. And I remember our when we were doing video album reviews, episode 100 was Master of Puppets.
That's right.
And so because of the context of the video review channel, we had to listen to that album a number of times. Now, you obviously, that's I think your favorite album of all time, or at one point in time,
it was
your favorite album of all time. Always up there.
Right now, it's sitting at number 3. But I mean, you can take those and rearrange
absolutely.
them. It depends on the day.
And in that dive into that album back in 2010, whenever we did that, I liked it. I liked it. I mean, I really started to like it.
You liked it a lot. I think it turned you on to the idea of metal. Yeah. A little more accepting.
And we listened to, I've obviously heard some more Metallica hanging out with you over the years, but I've never like sat down and gone through their discography before. I never wanted to. It was just not it was just not there. Even though that you and honestly your whole family has been huge Metallica heads as long as I've known you, which I've known you for over half your life now.
That's true.
Which is kind of scary when you think about it.
It's really scary.
So anyways, like but I would come back to Master of Puppets, so I knew that there was something there. Anyways, this podcast really has set me up to just find myself falling in love with new bands that I never thought that I would fall in love with their music, and I totally am there with Metallica's 80s work. I really am. The last few weeks has just been just a wonderful experience of just this whole world that I didn't even I had never taken the time to like fully understand and grasp what Metallica was doing and how important it was and how just damn badass it was, Now, that's my story. Tom, what's your story? When did you start listening to Metallica? What clicked with you? How old were you?
So I started listening to Metallica probably when I was around 7 or 8. It was when Load came out, which was 1996. So yeah, I was about 7 years old. And I just remember hearing some of the singles from that on the radio. And, we'll get to 90s Metallica in the next part, of course.
Right.
So I'm not going to give away all my thoughts about Load. It's not one of my more favorite Metallica albums.
Tom, you just said you were going to give that away.
But that's as much as I'm saying. That's as much as I'm divulging right now. But the singles caught my ear, and for a very young kid who was growing up on 90s alternative rock, the thing about Metallica is, and once again we'll get to this more the historical context of the 90s. But it was different than a lot of the grunge and alternative rock that was out there, because it was hard rock, it was heavier, and that was really appealing to me. And from there, I my whole family got into it. My older brothers did. I remember I had Kill 'Em All on cassette tape, and my brothers ended up getting, Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets and Black Album, and then Justice for All on CD over the next year or two. And then Reload came out the next year. I got that album and really liked it. So I was just immersed in all of their stuff. They were one of the first bands that I liked enough to really want to hear everything that they had done up to that point. And of course, as a young kid, I didn't really care as much about the historical context or the timeline like I ended up geeking out over in my teens. But at the time, I just knew this is music that I like and I want more of it. And why I ended up falling in love with Metallica, and the reason they were such a pivotal band for me growing up, is because jumping into their discography in 1996, they already had so much to offer. And as I listened to each of their albums, got to know them, and got to understand why I liked certain aspects of the albums that they'd put out, it was just a very, kind of revealing process for me. I felt like that was a big thing for me in just understanding how I listen to music. And that's something that I love about their 80s work that I feel like people don't talk about a lot, is how much they changed. And obviously we're going to be highlighting that here across 4 albums spanning just 6 years, actually, 1983 to 1988. And they evolved so much from album to album. And I think they're an easy band to write off in the context of the 2000s, because people have had Enter Sandman and, some of their other maybe 90s singles crammed down their throat for so long that maybe they're a little cynical about them. I think they're a band that's a little easy to get cynical about.
And there's been, honestly, just a huge, over a couple decades now, there's been a huge different forms of metal movements that have happened. And a lot of it is, there's a lot of not very high quality artists in music that was released as part of those movements that I think that, if you're not looking carefully, I think that you can, or listening carefully, I think you could just easily lump Metallica in there. And obviously in our later podcast, we'll talk more in depthly about that. But I think that, Metallica's 80s work, it's unfair to lump that with everything else, because they kind of started it. So as we dive into that historical context, I think we should start with a PSA, or at least I want to, and then you can add on to this, because I just want to come out and say that if you define yourself or take pride in knowing more about Metallica than the average person, I want to concede defeat to you right now, because I personally don't know a ton of history about this band. Now, Tom, here being a lifelong fan of Metallica, probably knows much more than I do, obviously. But I don't want this to turn into, they don't know what they're talking about. That's not the point.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is provide enough historical context that we can facilitate discussion on the albums that Metallica came out with in the 80s.
Right.
So if you'll just bear with us through that.
Yeah, it's all meant to just drive our discussion and our opinions. We try to highlight the points that we feel are relevant, but I mean, the fact is this could just be an audio documentary, but that's not what we want it to be.
It's actually, there's, and you've showed me over the past few days, Tom, like there's a ton of resources out there that you can go and learn about Metallica and see some of their early live performances. They're actually a pretty well documented band. So.
Yeah, they really are from the beginning. And I think that's because, as we're going to jump into, they really shot to stardom very early at a young age, early in their career, and it really helped to set them up for success.
So, Tom, who are Metallica and how did they form?
Well, Metallica today is Kirk Hammett, James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, and Robert Trujillo. They started, though, a very different foursome. The band actually started in late 1981. Lars Ulrich, who is the drummer of the band, he was just in his late teens, living in California. He's actually Danish, and his parents had sent him to California to learn how to play tennis, like his father, who is actually a famous tennis player. Kind of interesting tidbit. But he got interested in drums and metal music instead, so he actually put just like a classified want ad out looking for people to play metal music with him. And James Hetfield happened to spot this ad, responded to it. He was playing guitar in some like cover bands at the time, just with friends of his from school, and wanted to write more and do more of his own thing, but the people he was playing these cover bands with didn't really want to. So he responded to Lars's request, and they got together and found that they had a shared love for a new wave of British heavy metal music that inspired both of them, decided to start playing. So this was late 1981. Soon after, Dave Mustaine joined the band, who would later form Megadeth. We'll get into that in a bit. And then that was rounded out with Ron McGovney on the bass.
Ron McGovney.
I
love that name.
A name you don't hear too much anymore because he wasn't in the band for really all that long.
It's a good name, and that's a name that'll sell you a fine pair of boots.
if you say so.
Or he'll play bass in Metallica.
Oh, for a while. Right.
For a little while.
For a little while.
Yeah.
So, the lineup ended up changing a bit. And, well, quite a bit, really. Once it got into 1982, the band was starting to play more shows. They put out a little demo that went on this metal compilation, and that got them some buzz. They started playing shows, and actually their second gig ever was opening for the metal band Saxon, who was a pretty well-known band at the time. And like, wow, for your second gig, you kidding me? So that was really pretty early on for them, and keep in mind that they didn't really have much of a recording pedigree at this point. There wasn't really much of theirs to listen to, but they started to gain a following. Once you get into early 1983, they were starting to try to work out how they were going to record their debut. Ron McGovney left the band and was replaced by Cliff Burton, who they saw playing at a show with his earlier band Trauma. And this was Lars and James saw him play, and they heard him and thought that it was a guitar player because Cliff Burton's bass style sounds a lot like guitar. He used wah pedals, he used distortion. Not a whole lot of bassists were doing that at the time, at least the big name ones. So he had a different kind of sound, and they were just mesmerized by him. Said, hey, will you join our band? He said he only would if they were willing to relocate from Los Angeles to San Francisco. So they moved to San Francisco for Cliff Burton. It's like when you get into a relationship and you move to,
honestly, that's huge.
It's a big.
It showed the gravity of how serious they took their music and what they wanted to do.
Well, they were that epitome, I think, of the just working band. They crashed on fans' couches. They did whatever they needed to do to make the music work. And it's really a good thing because they had the dedication to become almost savant-like at their instruments early on. At least some of them. We'll talk about, technicality in a little bit and style. But soon after that, they were slated in May of 1983 to go and record their debut album for Megaforce Records. And in April, I believe, they ended up kicking Dave Mustaine out of the band for alcohol and drug problems. They were having some personality, just issues with him, some fights. So they kicked him out, and then very shortly after, like right away, Kirk Hammett joined the band on lead guitar, and that was their lineup. So there were, like I said, some key lineup changes, but I think one thing to take out of that is that the band started and focused pretty much from day one around James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich.
Right.
As a songwriting duo, James as a frontman, a singer, guitarist. Actually, in the beginning, James was very shy with the crowd, and he preferred to have Dave Mustaine do the crowd interaction and stuff.
Which he is the furthest thing from shy.
Right. Anymore. Like
Yeah.
he really stepped into it. It was one of those situations where I think he didn't really want to be the singer, but had to, which we've seen in a lot of success stories throughout rock and roll history. Jimi Hendrix, Elton John. James Hetfield is another one of those that he really had to reshape his own self-image and personality to fit that metal frontman persona.
Mm-hmm. So, Tom, you said that they kicked Dave Mustaine out and got Kirk Hammett to come in, play, as their lead guitarist, finish the lineup out, right as they were going into the studio. Now, their first album, Kill 'Em All, that's not what it was originally. When they went to the studio, what was it actually supposed to be called?
They originally wanted to title the record Metal Up Your Ass.
Now that is a sweet album name. Like, if you want to talk, and I wonder what the album artwork would have looked like.
They sell T-shirts now with the original cover on, and it's like a toilet with a metal spike coming out of it.
Oh,
yeah.
That sounds terrifying and uncomfortable.
Right. And apparently, the label thought that the super violent album title "Kill 'Em All" with a picture of a bloody hammer was much more appropriate.
Yeah,
right.
That's a good point. You do have the "Kill 'Em All" poster right there that you referenced there.
Yeah.
So it's 1983. Mm-hmm. They're starting to record "Kill 'Em All," and jumping into the music. Of "Kill 'Em All" here. Let it begin. Metallica, "Kill 'Em All." This is an album that after you showed me, or after we did Master of Puppets, that I actually got into this album because I had heard it was different than all the other Metallica, and I was like, well, what the hell? I wanna put on, the earliest Metallica I can get, just see how batshit crazy and different it is. And honestly, while it is different, it's still very Metallica. This totally fits the canon Metallica that you think of when you think of Metallica. But if I were to describe at a very high level what this sound is it's thrashy, and this album was the seminal album in thrash metal.
Yeah,
but I think that a lot of that is because of all of the punk music, the punk influence that you hear. It is just dripping in punk influence. It's nothing but punk, and these guys were very much into punk music. Coming into Metallica and the music that they were starting to create.
Yeah. So the thrash metal moniker didn't even exist until I want to say like 1984.
Oh.
So
they created it.
Well, but it's like with all genres. You can't create a genre label until enough bands have done something similar enough to group them together. So naturally, by that point, some time will have elapsed.
Yeah.
So it's not like Metallica decided they wanted to do thrash metal. That's a label that was put on it after the fact. What they referred to it at the time was power metal.
Power metal,
which I think makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's a good title for it.
It's adrenaline driven.
Right.
It's about when you put it on, you feel just the energy flowing through your veins because the music is just so powerful. Yep. Power metal really works. That's a good point.
But they were influenced, keep in mind at this point, metal was a fairly new genre. So a lot of their influences were contemporaries. You had that kind of prog rock side of thing. Cliff Burton, as the bassist, was very influenced by Rush. But they were also all very influenced by punk music. Misfits, you could see them wearing Misfits t-shirts all the frickin' time. And Misfits was a band that had only been around for like a year or two before them, really.
Right.
And same thing with bands like Iron Maiden. And people, I think, give them a lot of crap. I should say they give Lars a lot of crap for his drum performance, right? And that's actually something that I will defend to the day I die. Yeah, Lars isn't the best technical drummer, but the point is that he does what he needs to do, and they're not Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden has such a more technical. And I'm just pulling the Iron Maiden comparison out of nowhere. I'm just saying, they were contemporaries, but they also helped influence Metallica. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like you listen to like Steve Harris, Iron Maiden's bass player, he's all over the place. The bass is higher up in the mix. The guitars have don't quite have those like thick riffs. The drums have a lot more movement. Sure. But that's because Iron Maiden has a more prog rock and prog metal background.
Right.
Metallica, especially Kill 'Em All, is all about the punk influences.
Right.
You listen to Lars's drumming, and it is that powerful driving kick drum, offbeat snare drum, quick fills, And the thing that people don't appreciate about that, and I feel like if you're a drummer, you probably understand this more, but yeah, it's not necessarily impressively technical drum writing or composition, but God, those beats are hard to play. They take endurance and they take accuracy, and that's a whole different kind of skill set that, in a way, doing those quick, kind of Iron Maiden drum parts, in a way, it can actually be easier if you're moving around a lot.
Sure.
Those punk beats are hard, and I think that actually Lars does it really well. But you listen to like later in the 80s when like the Offspring started their career, you listen to bands like that and like listen to Motor Breath from Kill 'Em All, and it sounds like it could have been an Offspring song 10 years later.
Absolutely.
Like it was all about that punk edge, but then working in the metal guitar solos, the lyrical themes of death and darkness, and that was the kind of the package they created.
And while there is a lot of punk influence here, you also hear a lot of just classic rock.
Oh yeah,
especially comes out in the guitar melodies, particularly like Hammett's solos. But you hear this throughout the album. So this mixture, the way that they're able to just perfectly blend punk influence with classic rock is quite brilliant, because it makes it adds this edge to a sense of familiarity to rock music, and it provides for something that's just honestly a very special experience. I think that from a sound perspective, this album really celebrates what that metal music deserved to be on the map.
Yeah.
And I think that this album did put metal music front and center on the map. And a lot of that was due to just some of the just incredible performances and early glimpses into Metallica as just being brilliant songwriters.
And I think another thing that helped drive that was their image. I mean, these were like 19-year-old kids when they recorded Kill 'Em All. And this, not only the skill that they already had was impressive, but they weren't old enough to really have a contrived sense of themselves, I think. You look at a lot of the roots of metal and what ended up becoming like hair metal in the 80s. You look at bands like, Van Halen, and obviously that was all about showmanship, all the way up through like Guns N' Roses. And I'm not trying to disrespect these bands. They're still great. Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction was a huge album when it came out later in the 80s. But once again, they had this showmanship. They had this more contrived image. Metallica was just a bunch of greasy teenage kids who were, trying to find beer money and gear money and play whatever big rock shows they could and play as freaking fast as they physically could muster.
And as loud as they could muster, too.
And I think there's just something beautifully authentic about that, and they captured this darkness that I think a lot of other bands of the time were a little more cartoony about.
Yeah, and I think one of the areas that when you listen to Kill 'Em All that differs from later Metallica, even the next album, Ride the Lightning, is the vocals. Hetfield's vocals here are really more like rhythmic screaming and yelling. They're like, he has this very shrill presentation that adds to the frantic intensity that's going on everywhere else in the sound. And the other thing that's really interesting about what he does that I actually really like, I think it fits the general sound of the album, is he provides lots of accents in the vocals, and they just give that added rhythmic dimension. He's emphasizing key syllables and delivering them louder and providing extra emphasis. And what that does is it not only adds intensity and contrast to the song, to the sound, but he also draws the listener in to get you actually hearing some of the lyrics. And, saying something that about the lyrics is a little bit hard on this record because it's hard to hear them.
Yeah.
The production is pretty lo-fi on this record. They really didn't have. Honestly, I'm betting the budget wasn't that.
No,
wasn't
they
that
had
great.
they had to scrape money together, and like the label owner had to borrow money to fund this.
Yep. Yeah, it's really hard to pick apart the lyrics and really hear them in the mix. Now, obviously, through countless cumulative, thousands and thousands of hours of people poring over the sound, like we know what the lyrics are at this point in time, and obviously the lyrics were pointing towards Metallica being, at least in the early 80s, quite ahead of their time when it came to lyrical composition. But as far as the rest of the production goes, I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts, Tom, on the production on this record. Because to me, while it is pretty lo-fi, that also adds a lot of authenticity to the sound.
Sure.
You know, you got really loud guitars, and they're often, muddied together. The bass sounds like a guitar because they're pretty much not putting any production emphasis on the bass.
Right. And Cliff Burton followed the guitars a lot of the time. The moments where he strays from it, I think, come out really well. There's this great part in Seek and Destroy where they do the riff, the da 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 da, and Cliff starts in the high octave, and then while the guitars repeat it in the same octave, he moves down to the lower octave, and like that part always sticks out to me.
Right.
There are these little brilliant nuances like that throughout this record that really, like, that's what it's all about to me, is that attention to detail.
And the bass, Cliff Burton's bass performance and the bass compositions on this record are just out of this world good. The bass just hauls ass throughout, perfectly performed.
And also, I mean, we have to call out track 5, Anesthesia Pulling Teeth, which is a bass solo.
Yep.
And this is another thing that I think set them apart, is what bands on their debut album were dedicating an entire track to the bass player.
Well, bands had Cliff Burton as their bassist? I mean,
right.
Probably one of the best bassists of all time.
Yeah. I mean, performances like that song and on Orion later on Master of Puppets are what made me want to start playing bass.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a huge inspiration to a lot of people because he filled that role and stepped up to it in a way that I think a lot of people just didn't. But I mean, in particular too, he'd only been, by the time they recorded that album, he'd only been in the band for a few months, a couple months when they recorded it, and they released it a couple months after that. I mean, on the Cliff 'Em All video, which is a compilation of videos that came out in 1987 after Cliff's death, you can see him playing that bass solo at at his second gig with Metallica.
Right.
And they're letting him play this bass solo because right away they recognized him as an asset to the band.
I mean, like when they recruited him, they were willing to move to San Francisco.
Right.
They knew this guy was that special.
Right.
And I think that shows, I mean, it shows dedication to their craft and their the full extent of their aspirations of where they want to go, but it also shows that these guys really knew talent when they saw it.
Yeah.
And Cliff obviously plays a huge role on each of these early records. Particularly in Ride the Lightning and the songwriting, he really starts to bloom. But on Kill 'Em All, you still have more of that thrashy metal. A lot of these songs here are still heavily influenced from a songwriting perspective from Dave Mustaine. In fact,
yes.
Dave even accused Kirk Hammett of just stealing his guitar parts.
Yeah, well, because he kind of did, but it's because they already had demo recordings, and James and Lars really liked the parts that Dave did. They couldn't get along with him as a person, so they had Hammett try to mirror those.
Yeah.
And I mean, they still gave him songwriting credits on those, but I think that's a part of the reason too that Kill 'Em All didn't turn out more advanced than it did, is because really they scrounged together their remaining two members, Kirk and Cliff, so shortly before they were slated to record this, that it's almost kind of a miracle they recorded it at all.
Right.
But it's good that they got those two in there because they did a great job.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And
I feel like we got to address the Dave Mustaine thing too, because there are a lot of people who love Megadeth. I like Megadeth a lot. I like Metallica better, but I don't, that's not a knock against Megadeth. And a lot of people I've heard a lot of people say that Dave Mustaine would have been, that Metallica would have been better if Dave Mustaine had stayed. And to those people, you're entitled to your own opinion, but I think that just shows a slight ignorance to band dynamics. You have to understand that bands are more than just a compilation of talents, right? Dave Mustaine as a personality would not have worked with the other members of the band. The thing that makes Metallica work, and really any band work, is that it's the right combination of personalities and people who know their roles. Dave Mustaine had to be the leader of whatever band he was in. And at some point, it would have presented itself as a power struggle. And I think that...
Well, especially as fame gets to you, as drugs and alcohol increases, fame increases.
Right. But Dave Mustaine is a hugely talented guitarist and vocalist, And I think at some point there would have been a struggle there. So I think it's better that they split because we got two really good bands out of it. Now, obviously, not everyone feels that way. Obviously, Dave Mustaine did not feel that way for a long time. He harbored a lot of bad feelings about it. But, that I think that Kirk, as a more meek personality, fits better into the band. And he's a freaking amazing guitarist. So it ended up working out.
So the album opens up with a wonderful, exciting song that I actually love and reference as we were walking up to your studio recording room here. Hit the Lights. What do you think of Hit the Lights?
Hit the Lights is a great opener. I love the fade in. You have the drums and the guitar just thrashing, just building up to this drum fill, and then the riff comes in. I mean, right there, they're making a thesis statement.
Yes,
right?
they are.
They're saying this is the style we're doing before we've even jumped into it. And then you just get that yelp from James Hetfield, and they bust into the whole riff. Like
The chorus of this song is addictive.
Yeah.
And that's one thing on Kill 'Em All that I have to say, like, it's so hard because it's such a simple structure. Like, but that's punk music, and punk music pulls it off because it has super hard hitting, super fast tempo. And Metallica even accentuates it because they have these just mind bending guitar solos in every single track. And it just makes these songs flow. From Hit the Lights, we go into the Four Horsemen.
This is one of my favorite tracks.
This
on the
is
album.
also one of my favorite tracks on the album.
It's such a powerful track.
Over 7 minutes long.
Yeah, and this is one that really Dave Mustaine was the core writer for as well. So they took a lot of his riffs. Megadeth ended up reusing it under its original title, Mechanics, for one of their early albums. But also, one thing I think that also sets Metallica apart that you see in this song is where they go with the lyrical themes. The song Mechanics, the Megadeth track, was like about like having sex in a car, or like at a shop or something. Like that's the lyrical theme. Whereas on Kill 'Em All, Four Horsemen, it's about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. It's about death and doom and destruction and sin.
Kind of shows you the difference in context there.
Right. Exactly. So that's where they're going with it. But I mean, the riffs in that song is just killer. And you watch videos of them playing it live, and they somehow play it even faster than they do on the album.
Following the Four Horsemen, we move on to James Hetfield's sole songwriting credit on Motor Breath, which is a song I'm going to say is probably one of my least favorite on this record.
Yeah.
Still, I think it's a strong song, just not one of my favorites.
When I was younger, it was one of my more favorite ones. It was one that kind of helped me get into them more, their early stuff, simply because it does have a vocal melody that's a little bit easier to follow.
Yes.
And I also love that actually throughout their entire discography, not counting live albums or Garage Inc., which is like the B-sides and covers compilation, that is their shortest song at 3 minutes and 8 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tom doesn't have a computer in front of him. The fact that he knows the tracks in every order, but he also knew that was 3 minutes and 8 seconds long.
I kept that one in my old noggin.
You blow my mind, my friend. You blow my mind. Then we have Jump in the Fire.
Mm-hmm. Another Mustaine riff that they kept.
Yeah, he's credited on 4 of these tracks here. But I feel like his influence exceeded that on this record.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as a lead guitarist, I mean, lead guitar, I think later in the band's career would end up being more focused around just Kirk doing solos. But in these early days, you saw the lead guitar play a much more prime role in the actual foundation of the song. And I mean, Jump in the Fire, that intro guitar line, that's a lead guitar part, but it is the core of the song before they really get into that more beefy riff-based kind of, power chord-based part of the track.
Halfway through the album, Cliff Burton's Pulling Teeth, or Anesthesia, the instrumental track where Lars comes in about 3 minutes in, and it's very, very powerful. And it's just a great performance throughout that entire track. And that's one while I don't find that it's like my favorite track on the album, every time I hear it, I find it to be just impressive to listen to what Cliff Burton is doing with his bass guitar.
Yeah, and I can understand it not being someone's favorite track. I mean, it's not one of my more favorite tracks, but I just think just the sheer concept of them allowing him to do that on their debut, putting it kind of right in the middle of the album, like it helps to break things up.
It absolutely does. It's a nice intermission between the front half of the record, which was very this is a very up tempo, almost optimistic sounding metal album.
Yeah.
And the back half gets a bit heavier, gets a bit darker as well. Moving into Whiplash, track 6, which Whiplash is one of my favorite tracks on the album. This is probably the thrashiest song that you hear on this record, and it's
like the thrash metal manifesto.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
And it just kicks you in the teeth, like from the first moments, and it really doesn't let up.
And I love that transition. And, you think about it on the original record, that's when you would have flipped it, is between those two tracks, right?
Yeah.
But I love you have the end of Pulling Teeth, and you just have that distorted bass sound just sustaining, and then Whiplash starts with just a da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, just machine gun fire drum and guitar duo. And then they just go into this kind of more chill tom thing. Then the song just takes off. It's really kind of neat too, because you look at the lyrical themes. These are lyrical themes that you don't see come up on future Metallica albums. Songs like Whiplash, Motor Breath, Hit the Lights, which is basically just these guys conveying their love for music, their dedication to metal music and the metal rock and roll lifestyle. That's what it's all about, is how much fun it is to play shows and tour and do these gigs. In Whiplash, they reference themselves. We'll never stop because we're Metallica. They put their own band name into the song. That's something that bands used to do more back in the 70s and 80s, but it's just it kind of shows where they were at in their career, where their minds were at. That's what they were writing songs about. So but then you were right, Jake, because moving on from there, the rest of the album does get a little bit heavier and also darker in lyrical theme as well. When we move into No Remorse, which is about war, Phantom Lord. Actually, I skipped Phantom Lord, didn't I? Phantom Lord, which is a little bit more almost sci-fi-ish.
It's another Mustaine track.
Yep.
Honestly, that's not one of my favorite tracks on this record, but I appreciate the lyrical content on that one, because you could see kind of some of the direction of where they were going.
Right.
And No Remorse has just a truly just that guitar. That main guitar crunch riff that they do in the middle of the song, it has a very classic rock feel to it, yet still in that thrash metal sense. So that's when I think of that blend of classic rock and thrash punk, that's the song that I think of as No Remorse. My favorite song on the record, though, and probably the most well-known song from this album, is track 9, Seek and Destroy.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites also.
Everything about that song, I think, just screams Metallica. It shows. It also kind of points the direction. It's like the North Star. This is where we're going, because I think you see a lot of their next couple of records, similar sounds coming from the guitars. A lot of the things that Cliff does on his bass in Seek and Destroy is just amazing as a foundation for the sound.
Yeah. Another one that's another track also that's based more on a lead riff. That's the memorable part, not these chunky power chord movements or anything like that. Then we move into the closing track, Metal Militia, which is another just...
It's an assault. How did we do that? That was kind of scary. It's a guitar assault. That's
really
what it is.
Yep.
They're attacking you with guitars, and it's kind of a great epic way of closing out this epic guitar assault of an album.
Yep.
This was just a solid debut, and it's one of those It's one of those albums that you know, at the time, I think contextually, if you take into account where music was at the time, like this album, it made waves.
Yeah.
It made waves. It kind of carved out its own niche right from the very beginning of that Metallica's just this very special entity, and kind of a force that was going to be around.
Yeah. And I mean, you saw that right away. They were playing big shows. You watched that Cliff 'Em All video. And the thing that's fascinating to me about that is a lot of these shows are between 83 and 85, when they'd only put out like an album or two, and they're already drawing crowds. I mean, they were already getting attention from press and TV spots and interviews when they were, you know, before Kill 'Em All had even come out. So they were really, as you said, Jake, just making waves in the metal community and really helping to bolster it, make it into something.
Yeah. So that was 1983.
Mm-hmm.
The following year in 1984, their second album, Ride the Lightning, is released. Now, I'm going to start this Ride the Lightning section with a quote I read from Stephen Huey at AllMusic that I thought is just beyond perfect for describing the difference between Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning. He said, "If Kill 'Em All was the manifesto, Ride the Lightning was the revolution itself."
I like that.
Isn't that perfect? Doesn't that like describe perfect?
That's good music journalism right there.
That's good music journalism, and you know, I read when I'm digging into a band, I read a lot of music reviews.
Yeah.
Just to provide different context and different perspectives, and of course, like everyone loves, every music critic out there is gonna give early Metallica a lot of props because they were gods. They were gods. I mean, they still are, but like the albums that they released back then are just some of the best metal albums you'll hear that really changed the shape of music. And Ride the Lightning is certainly one of those records. You know, it's a huge musical evolution from Kill 'Em All to Ride the Lightning, and it's evident from the opening moments of Fight Fire with the first track on the record with that classical acoustic guitar intro.
Yeah. Which is absolutely gorgeous. And actually, I guess a lot of people got upset about that because after just getting attacked from the moment that Kill 'Em All starts to the moment it ends, all of a sudden they're starting their sophomore album with some acoustic classical guitar. Right. But you know, moments like that is what made them so special because they cared about their craft. Cliff Burton now at this point plays a much more prominent role in the songwriting. Cliff Burton was the only member of the band who was actually classically trained in music. He helped to teach James Hetfield the idea of music theory and how harmonies worked and how all the music worked together. And he played a big role in the songwriting, starting with Ride the Lightning. You know, we have to keep in mind that Kill 'Em All was written by Hetfield and Ulrich and Dave Mustaine, basically. Now, all of a sudden, Kirk Hammett and Cliff Burton, now that they've been with the band for a while, they're starting to get their songwriting influence in there, and wow, do things just blossom from there.
And to your point, throughout this record, one of the first things you notice when you try to compare the two is that the guitar is so much more reliant on melody. The songwriting is so much more reliant on melody instead of that rhythmic, just, you know, you call it like the chunky chords that you hear. But it's now so much more built around like actual guitar melodies that carry the song. It actually adds a almost like while you still get the intensity, you still get the thrashiness. You can still hear that punk influence. The sound on Ride the Lightning is evolved, and it evolved because they're adding these layers of melody through the guitar and the bass. And it gives a different emotional context to the music. And honestly, the optimistic sound of Kill 'Em All, the brighter side, the warmer side of the music is crushed dead.
It's gone.
I mean, it's crushed dead because even like the album artwork and you know, frankly, the you know, bloody hammer of Kill 'Em All, that really, honestly, it doesn't really fit perfectly. I mean, just from like a heaviness standpoint,
I almost
maybe
think the metal up your ass thing fits better.
Yeah,
it really does.
Right. Because it signified fun, like a certain levity to it, right? Whereas Ride the Lightning, you see an electric chair on the cover, and each of these songs are so lyrically themed around dark,
right?
motifs, you know?
That's the thing, is Kill 'Em All had some of that, like Jump in the Fire, about hell and Satan.
Right.
But
it wasn't every track.
Let's face it was like that. You're right. But here's the thing: take the lyrics and juxtapose it with how they're presenting it. The chorus to that song opens with "So come on," like it almost sounds kind of fun. Like I'm just kind of moving my arms to it, right? And then you get to Fight Fire with Fire, and right away from that riff that just goes down and down, dun, 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 dun. And then Hetfield's vocals are not as high and shrill anymore. They are low and kind of obscured, just gruff barks almost. And he's singing about nuclear warfare and the Armageddon, not from Satan, not from the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but the Armageddon of created by man.
Right.
Like, jeez, so much darker.
I mean, and Hetfield's vocals improved from album to album, and that's saying a lot. That's only 1 year. You get a lot of live shows there. I don't know. I know at some point he got some vocal training in there, but I'm not sure if it was this early on.
Well, and they all just worked harder to get better at their instruments. Kirk Hammett had actually, and this was actually before he joined the band, studied with Joe Satriani.
Oh, cool.
So that's pretty big. Somewhere in there, it might have actually been between Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, Lars started taking like rhythm theory and practiced more so that he could keep his tempo more locked down. And I think that's some, I think they all took it really seriously. They wanted to make the best music they could. That's something that set them apart, because while they were just kind of young kids who drank a lot and wanted to make metal music, they were very disciplined artists. They still were able to maintain both of those sides of themselves. Cliff Burton allegedly practiced about 6 hours a day on the bass.
Wow.
Like, holy crap. The only thing I do for 6 hours a day is sleep. Like, I don't, like, who has the dedication to their craft anymore like that? Like, it's absolutely incredible. But that's something that you really start to see come out. I think another huge change between Kill 'Em All and this album comes from the fact that they went to record it in Lars's home country of Denmark, which European metal had a very different sound to it. This also started their relationship with producer Flemming Rasmussen, who produced Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. So, they're in a different country. They've got a different kind of recording vibe. They've got a different producer who is much more about atmosphere, which I think it was just at a moment that really complemented their writing style as they were starting to grow as musicians.
The other thing about Ride the Lightning is you can really tell that some of these tracks on this record, and they did a nice job of structuring this record. You can tell that the track order is very intentional, and they were aiming at balance and album flow, which is something that more bands should take note of. And Metallica, early on at least, did a very good job of this. But you can also tell that some of these songs here stem from live performance. Mustaine still has a couple credits on the songwriting on some of these. And some of the more Kill 'Em All sounding tracks, the chunky guitar, that's what we're calling that, by the way. It's perfect. Chunky guitar. Well, when we talk about that, I actually go back to Guitar Hero. Yeah. And I can actually see the colored bar notes coming like the rhythms. I can see it. And my brain starts hurting right away just trying to figure that out. But you can see that there's some of those tracks in there. And then there's also tracks that originated more in the studio or have more of a studio feel to them. So you're starting to see that evolution in songwriting really just come out just in the recordings themselves. Yeah. So this album is 8 tracks long. Total is 47 minutes in length, a little over 47 minutes. Yep. Starts with Fight Fire with Fire, has that beautiful classical acoustic guitar opening intro to Fight Fire with Fire, but Fight Fire with Fire is not an acoustic guitar track. No. This thing hauls ass. Yeah. I mean, it is a dark, it's like a song from Kill 'Em All, in that you have that just punk, super fast guitar strumming, that chunky riff. But then it's so much darker, right? And one of the first things that I hear is James Hetfield's vocals are more, well, he still has that shrillness to it, but it's louder in the mix, and it's more directed and forceful and powerful overall, and it adds this kind of sense of doom to the tracks because it's just haunting the way he presents it. It's terrifying.
There's doom all over this album, and I think that's partially helped by the tempo. You mentioned Fight Fire with Fire as being kind of a faster track, and it is. When we move on to Ride the Lightning,
which
title
is
track, you start with this nice, high, screechy guitar part. Then when it settles into the riff, it is a little bit slower. And that song is about a man being wrongfully executed in the electric chair. Still quite dooming lyrics, right?
Yeah, that's what I want on a Sunday morning.
But that song hauls complete ass.
Right.
It's great. From there, you have For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is a classic. Starts with this great actual bass line. A lot of people, when they first hear that song, don't know that main part right in the beginning is a Cliff Burton part. The song was based around that. Absolutely awesome part. But think about once that song settles into that main riff, there is nothing as melodic and as slow on Kill 'Em All as what you have here. And that's what makes, it's almost sludgy at times. And that's what gives it that huge damning quality.
Right.
And you pair that with the lyrics, you pair that with the performance style that's changed, the production style that's changed. I mean, it was a marriage of all these qualities. This is not an accident. This is how you craft a brilliant album, is you take these items into account.
Following From Whom the Bell Tolls, track 3, we move on to Fade to Black, track 4, which is a power ballad that is about suicide.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing I want to note about this record is that it's the first in the discography that is songwriting credit is given to all 4 of the actual members of the band, where you have Hetfield, Ulrich, Burton, and Hammett all contributing. When you listen to this track, which it's almost a 7-minute track, in length, and had they not done the actually appropriate fade out to close the track out in the kind of soloing end that it has, it could have been much longer, and I'm sure in live performances they'll let it go on a lot longer than what is captured here on the record. But this is an absolutely beautiful track.
It's a very powerful.
It is. When I listen to this, when I listen to Fade to Black, not only is this my favorite power ballad that Metallica does, and I'm probably going to get a lot of shit for saying this, but I think it's way better than One.
No, that's fair.
It's just, to me, this is one of the strongest songs in their discography, if not the strongest song in their discography, just from a songwriting breadth perspective. They accomplish so much in the 7 minutes of Fade to Black. And I know that there's some controversy around the lyrical matter, but it's also, kind of beautiful at the same time. Like in suicide is a hot and controversial topic to boot, so there's really nothing that you can do to get around that. So I applaud them for having the courage to write a song that is so controversial, but it also it also kind of shined a light on the band as like, who are these guys? What are they doing? Gave them a lot of publicity, both good and bad.
And it gave them more of an emotional core. Who else was writing songs like that? I mean, they hadn't up to that point.
Well,
even.
It made them relatable.
Right.
And the interesting thing about Metallica is, they kind of had, the 80s was all about that, glam rock.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. It was a time where Metallica's music represented, similarly to punk, like a kick against the system.
Yeah.
It was a totally different perspective on music that was rebellious, absolutely had some angst, but anger and darkness to it that I think resonates with the darker side of humanity, which whether we choose to admit it or not is in all of us to some extent, right?
I mean, not me, but sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You're the nicest, happiest flower I've ever met. And like just the fact that they're able to accomplish so much in their music is, I think, just a credit to their ability to write just truly amazing compositions, metal compositions.
Yeah. And Fade to Black, think about being a metal fan and a Metallica fan in 1984 when that came out. I mean, that has to be like, whoa, man, they're not just singing about like rocking out,
right?
Like this is powerful stuff, but I think you're absolutely right that's what made them relatable. I think it's forcing an audience to acknowledge their feelings in a way that a lot of the other music they were listening to was not necessarily enabling them or challenging them to do. That's a really important part that music plays in our lives, and I think they were doing that for an audience that may not have found that through music.
Right. So the first 4 tracks of this record are quite frankly incredible.
Yeah.
There's no other way around it. Like they're just some of the 4 most legendary songs that rock music has ever heard, and 4 of the best songs in Metallica's catalog. The remaining 4 tracks on this record, how could they possibly live up to the first 4? And they just can't.
It's a front heavy album.
It is a front heavy album. If there's one critique you could really give Ride the Lightning, and I think that's a just one, it's that it's a front heavy record. The 5th track on this record is Trapped Under Ice. Tom, what are your thoughts on Trapped Under Ice?
So Trapped Under Ice, as well as Escape, the next track, I'm just going to address these together.
Sure.
This is what pulls Ride the Lightning down to being my least favorite album of theirs of the 80s. I still love this album, don't get me wrong, and these 2 tracks are still good tracks, but for me they disrupt the flow a little bit. I mean, Trapped Under Ice and Escape back to back have to be my 2 least favorite songs they put out in the 80s. Combining all 4 of their albums, like I would put those at the bottom. They just don't do much for me.
I actually really like Trapped Under Ice.
Yeah.
Escape, I can see it being a step down, and why you would consider that. It's just it doesn't have that inspirational performance aspect to it. And from a songwriting perspective, too, it's just a bit more tame.
Exactly. It doesn't carry the devastation that they've been building the momentum for. So it just sounds, it's not light. It's not like it's light rock, but I just mean compared to what we've had, like it feels like a step backwards to step into a song that has that kind of vibe. Trapped Under Ice, on the other hand, I think that's the better of the 2. But it's got a great fast moving riff. It brings some of that energy back. But for me, I think a big part of it is just I don't think that's James' best vocal writing. It's just not all that memorable to me. I don't know.
How do you feel about Creeping Death, track 7?
I really like that song.
I love Creeping Death.
That song brings it back. Creeping Death, the thing that I love about it is it starts again with one of those classic Metallica attention-grabbing intros with the da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. Like right away, it grabs your attention. And then it's a longer track, and it's another just more memorable one. I just feel like they pick it up really well off of the last 2 that, I said, are kind of lame.
I especially like the lyrics on Creeping Death, just at a high level. They're about the plagues of Egypt from biblical times in killing firstborn sons, and just works so well with the vibe of the song. It's harrowing, and I really enjoy it. The album closes with an instrumental, an over almost 9-minute long instrumental called "The Call of Cthulhu."
Yeah, this song is breathtaking to me. Yeah. I freaking love this song.
It's incredible.
And once again, talk about an evolution from Kill 'Em All. I mean, this is it's a melodic masterpiece, and really, it has more of a of a classical kind of feel. Like this sounds like something Tchaikovsky would do, only performed by a metal band, which is interesting because then they would do on their S&M Symphony and Metallica album, about 15 years later, they would do a version of this with an orchestra, or with a symphony rather. So like it sets itself up for that. That's what it sounds like to me, but it's just this awesome rock instrumental masterpiece. I think it's the perfect closing for this album, and it's honestly one of my more favorite Metallica songs. The guitar riffs in there are endlessly awesome. After Ride the Lightning, 1984 through 1985, and up to the recording of Master of Puppets, their third album, which came out in 1986, they just continued to see their fan base grow. They continued to do shows, and they were, getting pretty huge for being still a very young band. But from there, I think they took responsibility upon themselves to continue improving. This is, as I mentioned earlier, another phase where they started really thinking about the way they were writing songs. They were digging more into music theory. They were, like I said, Lars was digging more into rhythm theory, and they had the ambition to really just make this album perfect. Like they wanted to just make a great album. And boy, did they ever with Master of Puppets in 1986.
Is this officially your favorite Metallica record?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to go between this and Injustice
I
for
flip
All.
between this and Injustice for All, and Injustice for All is a close second. I still love that album, but Master of Puppets for me, I mean, it's a masterpiece. Absolutely.
This is my favorite, obviously. Through researching and listening to these records over the last few weeks, I have to say that Ride the Lightning is so fantastic that it's my second favorite.
I don't blame you.
Followed by Kill 'Em All, and then after that, Injustice for All, and we'll talk about why once we get to Injustice for All. But
Sure.
but you're right. Like it's hard to describe Master of Puppets with any other word than perfect. This is a perfect record in every sense. I cannot think of one flaw that I hear here, and it's kind of hard to describe Master of Puppets after just going through a deep analysis of Ride the Lightning, because the albums are so similar.
Yeah,
and you might ask, if the albums are so similar, if Master of Puppets is so similar to Ride the Lightning, is it really that great of an album? Is it really a masterpiece? Well, absolutely, because Ride the Lightning, I would argue, isn't perfect. It's a great record. I would score it 100 because contextually, I mean, like our scores were always about comparing other albums, an album that we're listening to, all the other stuff that comes out. So just from a relativity perspective, it's a 100. But in the context of what Metallica is capable of, they're never going to make another Master of Puppets. It's not possible for them to make an album that good, that perfect, because they took all of the momentum. As the All Music reviewer said, if Kill 'Em All is the manifesto and Ride the Lightning's the revolution, well, this is the new order. This is is the perfection of what they were presenting on Ride the Lightning. You similarly, you have 8 tracks on Master of Puppets, and it follows a relatively similar album flow. It opens with a very hard-hitting track called Battery, and just at a high level, some of the things that you hear in the sound that are more perfect. Again, I've talked about how James Hetfield's vocals improved and were so much larger and dooming on Ride the Lightning than they were on Kill 'Em All. Well, he improves even further.
He takes a step up.
Holy crap. There's so much more prominent and full sounding on Master of Puppets.
And I think that's the biggest difference. You're absolutely right that between any of their two albums, of this era, these two are the most similar, Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, but James' vocals, they're just so much more present. He knows how to make them more sinister. And Ride the Lightning, it was more those low growls, right? And Master of Puppets, he does it all.
His voice is becoming fuller. He's able to accentuate and actually have like a vocal presence that's not just this shrill shriek that he did before, which worked with the music at the time and their production style. As we said earlier, Kill 'Em All didn't really have much production to speak of. There's a lot of reverb. It was very reverb heavy at times, and then you started hearing things sound more polished on Ride the Lightning. But at this point, these guys are very popular. This is also their move to a major label.
Yeah. Oh, good point. Yeah, they moved to Elektra,
and because of that, they're working with a bigger budget. And writing kind of the same music that they did on Ride the Lightning, but they actually have the production budget to do it justice. And in 1986, doing production justice is with the technology that was available at the time, is actually a tougher feat than I think that we take for granted today.
Right.
And just the production throughout this record, particularly on the vocals, but I can hear it very much so in the guitars, including the bass guitar. The guitar sounds absolutely perfect on Master of Puppets, especially the solos. The solos on this record are some of the best guitar solos I have ever heard on any rock album ever. And we've joked around about doing a podcast on the best guitar solos, which I think would be fun.
Yeah, it would be.
But like when you really start thinking about it, how terrifying does that sound? Because it's
a lot
of the
to
crazy guitar solos we'd have to go through to do a fair assessment and provide a fair opinion on that. But half of them could come from this album.
Yeah,
that's just the way it is. Like that's what
their master
of Puppets is.
Mm-hmm. I think that the thing that Kirk does so well is balance just the fast-moving technicality with a lot of rhythm, with a lot of melody, rather, and style.
Absolutely.
There are too many metal guitarists who just think that playing fast is impressive. And
he's got the whole
impressive,
thing. It's very balanced.
Oh, absolutely. He knows exactly when to slow down and just let his guitar sing. And then he knows when to just hammer it out. I mean, this album is absolutely incredible. And actually, they got some flack for it still for moving to a new label. People thought this album was selling out. Are you kidding me?
Well, it's just a flawed argument because it's so similar in sound to Ride the Lightning. And if you said that, you'd have to say Ride the Lightning is selling out. No. But Metallica's core fan base, I mean, part of their shtick, part of what makes them so good is that rebellious nature, is that just deep-seated anger. So of course their fans are gonna push back against that. But that's like Green Bay Packer fans are pissed right now because they're not winning. Well, of course, you expect them to win. Well, you expect Metallica to rock your ass off nonstop. Yeah. Any moment that they're playing a melody or a softer part, which they need to do to make it interesting, you're going to get upset.
Well, and I think that also it represents the two sides of the band themselves. Right. As I mentioned, there's the rebellious teen rockers versus the disciplined musicians that were living within them. And I think that this album, we started to see it on Ride the Lightning, but this album is really when they just let the disciplined artist side of themselves take over. So at the beginning of the album, we start it with Battery. It's got this gorgeous, once again, acoustic guitar intro. And you have these harmonized acoustic guitar parts continue to come in until all of a sudden the riff busts into an electric version of that same part. And it's grand. It's epic sounding. And then it breaks back down into that main riff. And that it is brutal.
That riff is so fast and so brutal. It's hard when you're trying to comprehend what you're hearing. It's hard not to just like your mind kind of melts just thinking about it. But also Hetfield's vocal delivery and how he's doing that emphasis thing again that he does that he's really good at, that where he adds
kind
emphasis,
of staccato,
staccato delivery where he emphasizes certain syllables. But he's moving so much faster and it's so much more fuller sounding that it just packs a punch. And the lyrics are great throughout these albums, but especially great on Battery.
Now moving into Master of Puppets, the title track. This is my favorite song of all time. I can't say enough good about this song. But that middle part where you have that kind of clean guitar riff that it falls apart into, and then it comes in with that harmonized guitar solo. that is the most gorgeous like 2 minutes of music that I've ever heard in my life. And then it builds back into that same riff, only it's
heaviest,
just got
crunching eighth note guitar chords that I've ever heard. I mean, it's doom.
Yeah.
It's doom metal. Like they just created doom metal right there.
And then moments later, you know, it goes back into a vocal part, then it goes into the guitar solo, and that guitar solo, holy shit.
Everything about that song is perfect.
Yeah.
You have the perfect song on the perfect album, and it's self-titled. It's just, there's nothing you can say about it other than it's perfect. And I think it's a great pick for your favorite song.
Yeah.
It has to be up there for me.
Yeah.
You know, I listened to this on Friday. I listened to this song like 3 times in a row, which is a considerable amount of time, as this song is over 8.5 minutes long. But it's one of those songs where when you listen to it, especially individually, when you finish the track, all you want to do is listen to it again.
Yeah,
and that's the
true.
mark of a great song. That's a mark of a song that truly is something special that you're going to fall in love with and keep with you forever, right? And Master of Puppets is one of those songs, I think, for both of us.
Yeah.
Just a hallmark of a track in their discography.
So from there, we have The Thing That Should Not Be.
How do you feel about this song?
I think this song's underrated.
Do you?
I don't think it's not a highlight for me, but when you think about what it does for the album, I mean, after the onslaught of the first 2 tracks,
That's
to slow it down, and you have this kind of creepy, sinister thing. You got lyrics that dive back into the kind of, it's like H.P. Lovecraft based kind of sci-fi, like horror themed. Which is actually where they pulled the Call of Cthulhu title from as well, even though that's an instrumental track. And so I kind of like that, like the verse is just this kind of creepy, like held out notes with these drum accents, and then James' vocals come in. I think the best vocal spots on the album is when he builds back into that kind of like chorus, if you will, riff with like the line that dark deception kills the light. The way he emphasizes kills there, kills the, like, oh man, that just gets me going. While it's you know, maybe not in my upper half of the album, I still think it serves a really strong purpose.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And you know, you're right, because coming after Master of Puppets, how could you possibly have any track live up to that? So it's always going to seem like kind of a letdown, but it's still a very well composed track.
So then moving on from there, we've got Welcome Home, Sanitarium. You know, another song that deals with, I feel like I would call this maybe kind of the fade to black of this album.
I love this track.
It's a great song. And it starts with that once again kind of light guitar. It's still electric guitar, but it's clean. It's got the harmonics. And this song, it's another one of theirs that starts kind of ballad-esque, but just builds into something real heavy.
After that, it goes into Disposable Heroes, which is another one of my favorite tracks on this record.
Same here. I would probably put this in my top 5 Metallica songs.
Oh, wow.
Like ever. This song blows me away. This is also has to be one of their most brutally fast songs. And right when you think it's over, they like pick it back up again.
Yep.
It's like what, like 8.5 minutes or something?
Yep, about that.
I mean, how do they even get through that? My wrist is hurting thinking about it. Like, how did they get through that song live?
I'm pretty sure they have wrist exercises that they do just to keep things loose.
Like,
you know,
you have to.
They don't want to cramp up on stage or
they have to have the most muscular wrists.
We should do some like visual inspection over the years. The Metallica, the Hetfield, Hammett wrists.
They just have these like disproportionate wrist muscles, like this huge lump. Kick my ass with their wrists.
Lump is such an interesting word.
I feel like we're digressing here.
They have the wrist lump. That's why they can do those power chunks.
Damn it. But anyway,
so moving on from Disposable Heroes, they move into Leper Messiah, which is a song that I feel like might be a little overrated.
this is probably my least favorite song on the album.
Yeah, I can see why, but it's very iconic.
Yeah.
Just the lyrics on this song are very iconic, and I think Hetfield's vocals are it's just a good honestly it's a good hook.
Yeah.
A good delivery. While I'd say like part of the reason why I think it's a little overrated, it's just a more simple track.
It is. Yeah. It doesn't carry a lot of the complexity or the energy that some of the other tracks do.
But again, I think you needed that between
You do.
Disposable Heroes and then track 7, the 8.5 minute instrumental called Orion. Which, Tom, this is actually one of the songs that when I was struggling with Metallica this is back when we were in college and I was coming over to your house and we would play cribbage over lunch. Remember that? 2007?
Yep.
I remember one time you put Metallica on, or you put Master of Puppets on while we were playing cribbage, and I was not digging. I wasn't ready for this yet, right at the time. My mind was pretty close to the indie music I was listening to. But you showed me Orion, and you were like, listen to some of the things that are going on in the bass and some of just this instrumental composition that you're hearing here. And I remember really enjoying it then. So when we actually went and reviewed it in 2010, how my mind was kind of open to this album because of this track. This was kind of like the gateway drug for me.
This song almost, like, to me feels more like something that like Led Zeppelin might do on Physical Graffiti.
Absolutely.
In the way that the all the instrumentals interplay, because it's still, because of the effects that they're using, it's still kind of a heavy song, but everything about it is so nimble and so precise. The guitar solo isn't like huge and dooming like we heard in the past, but it's not like the more lighthearted, fast-moving punk stuff that we heard on Kill 'Em All. It's just this smooth, kind of a classic rock vibe, but also kind of a prog vibe to it.
Right.
And it's something that we didn't really hear from them too much before this. But I mean, this song has to be a highlight.
Absolutely.
And especially Cliff Burton's bass solo in the middle where he picks it back up. Once, as I mentioned before, like that was one of the first bass parts I ever wanted to learn.
Right.
I heard that and I was like, that is incredible. I got to learn it. I mean, it's just a gorgeous song. And then it kind of fades out into nothingness and then goes into Damage Incorporated, which is the closing track off Master of Puppets. Now, a lot of the time, Metallica's closing tracks are very rarely my favorites. I think that Call of Cthulhu from Ride the Lightning is probably one of my favorite closing tracks of theirs. And Damage Incorporated was never a song that I was really drawn to as a song, but it ends this album with such a burst of energy. They just get driving again. It's a memorable track for that reason, and I believe one of the shorter tracks on the album, right? A little over 5 minutes.
Well, right. They have 3 tracks in the 5-minute range, which are the shortest tracks on that record.
Right.
And that's one thing to note is that as Metallica goes on, their albums start getting a little bit longer. Now, Kill 'Em All is actually several minutes longer than Ride the Lightning, but Ride the Lightning's 2 tracks less than Kill 'Em All. But the track lengths start increasing album to album. You certainly start to see the percentage length go up, and you see that continue as Metallica goes on. Their albums just get a little bit longer and longer each release.
So now it's 1986. In September, tragedy strikes while Metallica is on tour in Europe. Their tour bus crashes, and while Kirk, Lars, and James are somewhat unscathed, Cliff Burton tragically dies in this bus accident. And I like it. Oh my God. The guy was 24 years old. You believe that? Think about what he helped the band accomplish on their first 3 albums, what he set them up for, the parts that he wrote. Like he did all that at 24 and then died in this horrible accident. Like, I can't even fathom that. And the band was devastated, clearly, because Cliff was a huge part of their progression. They had to cancel the rest of their European tour, and they turned that around so quickly because they didn't want to lose momentum. They decided it's what Cliff would have wanted for them to keep going. I read that they actually got Cliff's family's blessing to get a new bass player and keep going, because they just had so much respect for the guy. So they held some auditions. They looked at other bass players. They explored having one person who auditioned for them. Fun tidbit was Les Claypool of Primus, who was actually a childhood friend of Kirk Hammett. Imagine hanging out with those two guys, right? But they ultimately ended up going with Jason Newsted. So they had him do some shows, kind of get in with the band. In 1987, they recorded the $5.98 EP, Garage Days Revisited. And it was basically just a kind of studio exercise. They just recorded a handful of covers. And I think it was just to get used to a new studio sound and to see how Jason Newsted fit in with the band. So they released that EP to kind of get back into the groove of things. But I mean, this was like not even a year after Cliff had passed away. They tried to turn that around so quickly. And the reason this is key is because I really don't think these guys had time to properly grieve and understand what that meant for them personally, which I think we'll see go into some of the way that they treated Jason Newsted as the new bass player. So we move from there into 1988, and we have And Justice for All, Metallica's fourth LP.
This has always been kind of a contentious album for Tom and I.
Yeah,
it's the in rainbows of
Metallica's discography.
And not in like a quality sense, just in the fact that Tom and I kind of disagree on this one, because you think this album is pure brilliance.
I love it,
and I see it as brilliant but very flawed, very flawed, and so I think we're going to offer two very different perspectives because there's a couple, like, to me, I can think of two things that come to mind that I'll get into in a bit after we describe the sound a bit more, because they did some evolution here. But they did a couple things here that I think knock this down a notch for me. And I think that it's evident that they relied so much on Cliff Burton in the songwriting and kind of in that production sense that it was very hard for them to deal with that from a musical perspective as well as a personal perspective.
Yeah. So I think that even if you're not as warm on it as I am, like you are, Jake, a little bit cooler on this album, I still think it's pretty amazing that they came out with something as good as they did coming out of that.
Yeah.
But I think that to contrast this from the earlier work, you really do see what Cliff's contribution to the band is. And that's not just because And Justice for All is notorious for having relatively no bass guitar in the mix, but it's also from a composition standpoint. This album is not as harmonically complex, not as melodically complex, but it is more rhythmically complex in a lot of ways. This is where they start really going nuts with song structures, even more so than before, with time signatures.
Yeah, I'd say this is definitely their most progressive record.
Yes. And now we started to see some of that on, like, Master of Puppets. The title track has some mathy aspects to it. They drop a beat in that verse riff.
Yep. But it's still balanced.
Right. But then, but And Justice for All, they just go off the deep end with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
On even the first two tracks, Blackened and then the title track, And Justice for All, they're dropping beats all over the place. They're adding beats. They're doing riffs in like 13. It's all over the place.
Yep. Another thing you see, this is 9 tracks instead of 8. The average track length again increases on this record. This album is over 11 minutes, a little less than 11 minutes longer than Master of Puppets was. This is a long album, and it's kind of bleak. It's feeling it has a darker, bleaker mood than any of the previous records. And even when you were dealing with tough subject matters like being like government control, suicide, nuclear war. Topics like that, like it's somehow like that's bleak, but still there's some beauty in that because of all of the melody that they were infusing into their music. That you kind of had this like like colorful human aspect to Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, whereas Injustice for All is more politically charged, and it's more it's just it's hard to describe, but it's bone chilling, you know?
Well, because it's so dry also.
Yeah.
There's nothing covering anything up, and I think this is another album where once again we had a significant change in James Hetfield's vocal presentation. Production has part of that because James' vocals on Injustice for All are at the forefront of the mix more than ever. But there's also...
They mixed them up.
Right. There's relatively no reverb on them. He has this consistent throaty growl that I just love on this album.
Who was the producer?
This is Flemming Rasmussen again.
So it's the same producer, but
he wasn't present for the mixing.
He didn't do the mixing.
Right.
And that is the toughest thing. And I think that we have to dive into the mixing on this record, because when you look at Master of Puppets, which as we described is perfect, I wouldn't argue that you can produce Master of Puppets better, especially given the context of 1986 when it came out. Injustice for All, that's just not the case. Now, this is a bit of personal critique here and bias, but I think the production here was actually quite butchered.
Yeah, a lot of people agree with you, man.
And I don't know if this was personal to Jason Newsted, but the bass is just inaudible on this record. Apparently, people tell me it's there, but I don't really know where. I can't really hear it.
So let's address that, because here's how the story goes. Apparently, Lars and James, or maybe just Lars, were sitting down with like the sound guy who wasn't the actual producer, but was helping them just adjust stuff for the final mix. And allegedly, Lars just told the guy to keep turning the bass down because he liked the way it brought out his drums.
That's a very Lars thing.
Yeah,
that's a very Lars thing to do.
Which is just a terrible thing to do.
It just showed the lack of respect that they had for Jason.
Well, now
and probably like the internal grieving that was going on that they're not admitting.
And that's the other side of it. Is there's the kind of selfishness of the mixing. Second is, admittedly, I don't think they were giving Jason a lot of freedom. He basically just followed the guitar riffs. So the bass is there, but I think that a lot of it is just the low end of what sounds like the low end of the guitar.
Absolutely.
So the way, the way that he was playing, the parts he was playing doesn't help with that, because, Cliff had some signature moments where he would stray from that. Jason wasn't quite doing that. Plus, they were supposedly like kind of hazing the guy.
Yeah.
They weren't treating him very well. They weren't really appreciating him. They were giving him shit a lot. And then I think that part of it had to have been also, and this is just speculation, but other people have speculated similarly, that they just hadn't got over Cliff's death. They couldn't really internally accept Jason as a full part of the band. Which is really a shame, because he probably could have contributed a lot more, and we'll see him do that a little bit on future albums, but not to the level that Cliff did. Now, they were never going to find anyone who could really replace Cliff Burton as a person.
One of a kind.
Right, he was one of a kind. But I think they could have tried a little harder, and I think that was part of it as well, is not just about making the album sound a certain way, but personally they were going through something, and that's unfortunately, I think the music did suffer for it a little bit.
Yeah. In that decision to just mix it down, I really wish they wouldn't have done that. It wasn't the only thing that went wrong in the production. I think, and Tom, like I remember I've been complaining to you about this, through over the years, but a lot in preparation for this podcast, about just the drums. I think that the drums sound bad on this record. From what I read, they didn't use, when they recorded the drums, they didn't use a room mic. They only used the up close mics, which is why the drums have just like they sound more clicky.
They sound over compressed.
Yeah, they're over compressed. They're more clicky because of that. So it just makes them sound very harsh. Also, everything is compressed together into this like muddy, brutal mess, whereas you had Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, where they achieved this much better sonic balance, and Justice for All is just this brutal punch of a sound. As I punch my microphone as I act that out, and obviously that can be seen or better heard as either appealing or less appealing. And the reason why, like, I really struggle with this is because I love listening to the guitar parts. And, you know, as we mentioned earlier, they're doing, on Injustice for All, they're doing so much more with different rhythms. And actually, like, I'd say, like, the bass, like, the average tempo of the tracks on Injustice for All is slower than previous records, because they're slowing things down so that they can provide more complexity and change up the rhythms of the song more. And I want to hear that guitar. I want to hear what they're doing in the guitar, so I'm turning it up. And because it's all mixed together and like kind of that just big like punch of a sound layer, that like it actually hurts my ears. Like I take my headphones off and my ears just feel like they're bleeding. Yeah, and that's dangerous. I think I actually think I might need to get checked out.
That is the thing about this album is
that's what I tell my wife when she blames me for my selective hearing. When
you're just like, I listen to Injustice for All.
I just listen to Injustice for All. I can't hear a thing that you're saying. I'm sorry, honey.
Every word you say sounds like a Lars Ulrich snare drum hit.
I know you want me to go do something right now, but instead I listen to Injustice for All. I can't hear a word.
That's how it is. That's how it ends up. So everything. There's no subtlety about this album. There's no subtleties, and that is a shame, because Master of Puppets and Ride the Lightning were albums that were full of subtlety in the mix, in the performance. Here, everything that they felt was worth hearing, they felt was worth compressing to the max and putting right at the forefront. Now, while I think that doesn't work on the side of the drums needed more of a room sound and they needed to be backed off in the mix. That's absolutely true. I think it does a favor for James's voice, because they happened to catch it at a time where his voice just sounded perfect.
Right.
It sounded great.
His vocal performances, his voice had improved, his vocal presentation had improved, his vocal performance improved. The added emphasis that you've heard him do throughout those records is at its peak on Injustice for All. Everything about James's vocals is like at its peak on this record, I would say.
Yeah, it's a great combination for that reason. So the album kicks off with Black and kind of fades in with this eerie kind of guitar effect sound, and then just busts right into it. And this song to me is just all about the riffs and the rhythm. This is where you really start to hear more than ever Lars and James just absolutely sync up with these complex rhythms, these crazy syncopations, and they just dance through it together. It's a really hard-hitting song, and this is one of my more favorite songs on the album.
Yeah, this is definitely my favorite track on the record.
Oh, really? Okay.
And yeah, definitely. I mean, I love One, which is Metallica's most well-known song, which we'll get to in a second. But Blackened, I think, is it's just like mentally challenging to listen to it, and I appreciate that aspect of it. But the thing about this record is, like, listening to any of the songs, like, you need to be I almost feel, with the exception of One, you have to be more impressed from the technicality that's being presented versus like the other aspects, the melody or and I would say the performances here, you know, especially the guitars and the vocals, like, are really working their asses off on this record. But Blackened is a good example of that. To begin with the dance of the dead. Blackened is the end. To begin with the dance of the dead. Come on, Blackened. Now, similarly to Master of Puppets, track 2 is self-titled and Justice for All. You like this song, Tom?
This is, next to Master of Puppets, the song, this is my second favorite Metallica
song. No kidding.
Yeah, I love this song. I just think it's just a masterfully composed track. The intro, guitar part is great.
Yeah.
I love that this one gets a little mathy. This is one I was talking about where they're going to like 13. They're doing these really odd rhythms. I think I really like the bits where it drops down and just Lars's drum part and he does those tom accents. But the riff is just killer to me in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. After the title track, Injustice for All, we move on to one of my track picks, Eye of the Beholder.
Yeah,
very strong
really like
song.
This one.
Yep, I like that song. After Eye of the Beholder, we move on to One, as I was just saying, you know, probably Metallica's most famous track that they've released from their 80s work, I would say.
Yeah.
Some of their 90s songs, obviously, they had some big hits there. But one, honestly, I became very familiar with this song through Guitar Hero in the 2000s.
And I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I actually think the best way to appreciate the bass on this album and through all of their 80s work, because of the way their albums were produced, is to play Guitar Hero Metallica. Because when you play the bass part, like in the mix of Guitar Hero Metallica, it actually comes up.
Oh, you actually hear
more.
it then?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's actually like you get a way better appreciation for it.
Oh, yeah. You should try that.
It's like,
do you have it?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, I know what we're doing this weekend.
That sounds great. Actually, I know what you're doing this weekend, and it's seeing Death Heaven.
Yeah, I'm doing that too. But then I'm going to come back, and then we're going to play.
We should play that sometime.
I would like that.
Your wrist will hurt after 2 songs.
I want...
You want those beefy wrist muscles, don't you?
The lump. The lump. The wrist lump.
Oh, damn it.
Yeah, but it's just one of the best guitar solos of all time in the track one.
And I love that song is kind of 2 halves. You have the softer first half into just the pummeling second half. That I really think is the, some of the faster speeds that you've heard on this album yet, which I think is what made it such a great, memorable song.
Now, I'm not sure if you're going to agree with me on this, but I think this album is front heavy. Those first 4 tracks are.
I do agree with that.
Okay, they're really strong, and I think that the album starts to slump a bit after 1. You have track 5, "The Shortest Straw," which I get that this is a good song in like Metallica canon, but it really doesn't do a lot for me.
I really like this one. It's not one of my more favorite Metallica songs, and even on this album, I put it kind of in the middle.
Right.
But the thing that I like about it is I still feel like it still carries the momentum for me in the sense that like that kind of sleazy sliding guitar part in the verse is just, that gets me every time. Now I will say I think that this is a song where we start to see some of the vocal inflections that James really starts to pick up throughout the 90s. But you listen to the chorus of this song, and if I'm just rocking out, I don't give a shit. But if I'm really paying attention, then the way in the chorus he pronounces the word straw is kind of goofy.
Yeah.
Straw. Shortest straw. Like that's when he starts picking up those vocal things that I think
he overinflects.
Right, exactly. And it gets to be a little bit dramatic.
After "The Shortest Straw," you have "Harvester of Sorrow," which is another well-known Metallica track.
Yeah.
This isn't a track pick for me on this record, but I like this song overall.
Yeah, I still love this track. I love that they bring back the lead guitar a little bit as kind of forming the foundation of the guitar riff with that intro. I really like that riff, but yeah, this isn't one of the better songs on the album, I'd say.
Yep, and then from there, I think it gets a little bit better. You had the track 7, a longer track, over 7.5 minutes. The Frayed Ends of Sanity. Really like this song. It's a very strong guitar song. Then a song that is dedicated. Cliff wrote it.
Yeah, the Cliff Burton still has a writing credit on this album, and it's track 8, "To Live Is to Die," which is one of my favorites on the album.
Yeah, me too.
And I love the fade-in acoustic part. And then they go into that nice, just sludgy kind of driving
it's practically
guitar bass riff.
It's just this epic, almost 10-minute track that really does do a good job of paying tribute to Cliff Burton. And I think that they needed that.
Yeah.
And then they close the album out with Dyer's Eve. So
Dyer's Eve, I feel similarly about this one as I do Damage Incorporated on Master of Puppets. It's not one of my more favorite tracks of theirs. It's not one of my more favorite tracks on Injustice for All, but it's the perfect closer for this album. And going from "To Live Is to Die," one of my favorite parts is they fade back into that acoustic part, and then it just cuts off so abruptly, so unapologetically, and just busts into that Dyer's Eve riff with dot, 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 like it scares me every time I put it on.
It's terrifying. This song I actually think is so full and technically complex. This song, of any of the tracks on this record, suffers the most from the production failures.
Yeah.
I think this song could have been one of Metallica's best if produced in a way that actually favored all of the crazy shit that's going on in this song, because it's a powerhouse. This is a great closing track. I didn't pick it as like one of my favorite tracks on this record, but it's up there. Like, it'd probably be the next one that I pick. I really like that track. This is a really strong album, but I think that the lack, the track lengths are so long, and they are in this album is a long listen to get through, that when you couple the complexity of the songs, this isn't quite as fluid as an album listen as any other 3 albums before it. And the reason is a change in direction as far as the songwriting is concerned. And I wouldn't change this about this record, because I think that this is what defines Injustice for All and makes it special. The fact that they were going in a more complex direction, that they were really focused on messing with the rhythms. They were trying to make this as complicated and complex as they absolutely could. They went to play Injustice for All and tour it, and the first night that they got out there, they got off stage and they go, well, shit, these songs are just too effing long and too hard to play, because they're so complex, so intense, that it took so much energy to the band. And honestly, I don't think that the fans got into it quite as much either, from what I read.
Right.
So when you consider all those things, they really set the bar high, but like, it was progress for the sake of progress, and it sacrificed some aspects of the music. And I think you couple a little bit of that with some of the follies on the mixing of this record, and you have kind of a hint of an inconsistent listen that still accomplished a lot, but isn't perfect.
I think you put it perfectly. This is an album where they it's almost like, and we're really saying this in hindsight, this is not something they did deliberately, but it's like they sacrificed the quality of the album a little bit for the sake of musical progress, for the sake of doing something different, trying something different. But you know what? It still paid off for them, because they saw another huge rise in popularity. This album went platinum in 9 weeks.
Whoa.
Yeah. Like, that's like, they had not accomplished that yet. They were for a metal band, they were reaching a level of popularity that bands with this kind of sound had not been able to achieve. And that's pretty huge. And Injustice for All helped that happen. There's a version you can listen to on YouTube called Injustice for Jason, where they put the bass back in the mix and remix it a bit.
I might like that.
You might. Check it out, because I'd be interested to know what you think. I think that they overcompensate. I think they put the bass in a little bit too much. But I actually saw there's an interview with Jason Newsted on YouTube that I thought was really neat, because he's like, yeah, this kid came up to me and was like, yeah, Injustice for Jason, this is the way it should have been. And Jason, to his credit, was kind of humble, and he's like, I think the way that it should have been is the way it was. That's the album that helped change rock music. It made a big impact, And it's interesting because I think you're right. We can sit and speculate, would it have been better sonically if they had done things differently? Absolutely. Would it have made the impact, and would it have been as memorable of an album? I don't know. And how do you balance those two things?
Sure. Master of Puppets is my favorite Metallica record. That's really the point I was trying to make.
I agree with you.
And for me, it's Master of Puppets, Ride the Lightning, Kill 'Em All, and then Injustice for All. But those are my top 4 Metallica records right there.
So yeah, same here. And what's funny is for me, our 1 and 3 spots are the same, but our 2 and 4 are flipped.
Yeah.
So for me, it's Master of Puppets, Injustice, Kill 'Em All, and then Ride the Lightning.
And my conclusion after this escapade we've been on over the last few weeks is that I think that you're undervaluing Ride the Lightning.
I'm sure I probably am.
But I'm fine, because I need some space, because you have the Metallica t-shirt and the Master of Puppets t-shirt. I'm getting a Ride the Lightning t-shirt,
you should.
buddy.
That'd be great.
So
it's also the only album from their 80s work that I don't have a poster of in this room. I have
you
Master of Puppets
you have
up here.
a spot right there.
You're
that
right.
You just
that would be
freed up.
perfect. Yeah. So, I think you're right. I think Ride the Lightning is fantastic. It's just one that I don't come back to as much. I still respect it musically just as much. I just don't find it pulling me back.
Gotcha. Well, Tom, the fact that all 4 of these records, the 1980s Metallica albums that we just talked about, are all four of our top favorite Metallica records, kind of spells out what
how the rest of this deep dive's gonna go?
Yeah. There's 6 albums after this that we'll split into decades. So we'll do the 90s after this. So that consists of Black Album, Load and Reload, and then we'll do the 2000s and now 2010s with Saint Anger, Death Magnetic, and the new one, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Get our review thoughts out on that in the context of the Metallica discography. We just talked your ear off for a long time, upwards of 2 hours on Metallica. Thanks for putting up with that. I know that these deep dives get a little overboard, but the way that Tom and I approach this is we really want these. It doesn't make sense to us to try to make them shorter if there's a lot of things to say on these records. So what we will do is naturally how we're splitting up the next 2. I think that these will be a little bit shorter. At least we're going to try to keep them below an hour. So we appreciate your time going through the monolithic first 4 records of Metallica in the 1980s. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation with Velocities in Music. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, your Facebook messages, and emails to us. Your participation is what makes Velocities in Music possible. So as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.